He humiliated her in court and thought it was over. But today, the young lawyer he crushed, is sitting across from him as Attorney General. And she remembers everything. Harold Pierce, the state's most decorated prosecutor, had spent 22 years on top. He thought no one could touch him. But as he stood at the defense table, facing charges of prosecutorial misconduct, something stopped him cold. A woman in a striking teal suit locked eyes with him. Familiar, but different. "Do you remember me, Mr. Pierce?" she asked. "You once told this court I was out of my depth. You said I should come back when I understood real law." The courtroom went silent. The man who had destroyed her confidence 5 years ago had no idea what was coming next. 5 years earlier, Alicia Bennett stood in courtroom 7C with her heart hammering against her ribs and a manila folder trembling in her hands. She was 28 years old, 11 months out of the public defender's office training program, and representing Marcus Cole, a 19-year-old accused of armed robbery based on a single eyewitness identification made in the dark from 40 feet away. She had evidence. Body camera footage showing the arresting officer threatening Marcus during questioning. A timeline that put him at his grandmother's house when the crime occurred. An expert witness prepared to testify about cross-racial identification errors. Harold Pierce stood across from her like a statue carved from marble and privilege, his silver hair catching the fluorescent lights, his custom suit worth more than Alicia made in a month. When she rose to present her motion to suppress the identification, Pierce didn't even look at her. He examined his manicured nails while she spoke, then stood with theatrical weariness. "Your Honor, counsel's aggressive approach to this motion betrays a fundamental misunderstanding of Fourth Amendment jurisprudence." He paused, letting the word aggressive hang in the air like an accusation. Perhaps if Ms. Bennett spent less time grandstanding and more time studying the basics, we wouldn't waste the court's time with these frivolous challenges. The judge denied her motion without explanation. During closing arguments, Pierce delivered a performance that had the jury nodding along, painting Marcus as a career criminal in training, while dismissing Alicia's defense as the work of someone clearly out of her depth. When he suggested she return to this courtroom when she understands how real law works, several jurors smiled. The jury convicted in 90 minutes. Alicia watched Marcus's mother drop her face into her hands, watched the bailiff lead her client away in chains, and felt something inside her crack clean through. The weeks after the verdict moved like footage played underwater. Alicia stopped sleeping through the night. She would wake at 3 in the morning with Pierce's voice in her head, telling her she didn't belong, that she wasn't good enough, that she was wasting everyone's time. She attended Marcus Cole's sentencing and watched his mother, a hospice nurse who worked double shifts, collapse in the gallery when the judge handed down 15 years. Alicia stood frozen, unable even to reach out and catch her. She started packing her office on a Thursday afternoon when the building was mostly empty. The cardboard boxes she'd requested from the supply closet sat half-filled with law books she'd annotated in colored tabs, case files she'd studied until dawn, the framed admission certificate to the state bar that now felt like a participation trophy for showing up. "Running won't make it hurt less." The voice came from the doorway. Gerald Thompson, the senior public defender who'd hired her, stood watching with his arms crossed. He was 63, had been fighting the system for 40 years, and had the weary eyes to prove it. "I lost an innocent kid his freedom," Alicia said without looking up. Pierce was right. "I'm not ready for this." Gerald walked in and closed the door. Pierce has a 94% conviction rate in cases with black defendants represented by black attorneys. 81% with white attorneys. You didn't lose because you weren't good enough, Alicia. You lost because the system is rigged. The question is whether you're going to let that break you, or whether you're going to get angry enough to break it back. He left the framed certificate on her desk and walked out. Alicia stared at it for a long time. Then she unpacked the boxes and started making a list of every case Pierce had ever prosecuted. The next 4 years reshaped Alicia the way a river reshapes stone, slowly, relentlessly, wearing away everything that wasn't essential. She left the public defender's office and joined the Innocence Project, where the losses were expected and the wins were measured in decades, not trial days. She learned to build cases with the patience of someone constructing a cathedral, brick by evidentiary brick. Her first exoneration took 18 months. A man named Jerome Washington, convicted of murder based on testimony from a jailhouse informant who later recanted. When the judge vacated the conviction and Jerome walked out after 12 years inside, Alicia stood in the back of the courtroom and let herself cry for the first time since Marcus Cole's trial. The second exoneration took 14 months. The third took 2 years. Local media started calling her the woman who doesn't quit. National legal journals published her articles on prosecutorial accountability. She spoke at law schools about systemic bias and watched young attorneys take notes with the same desperate hope she'd once carried. And through it all, she studied Harold Pierce. His case files became her obsession during sleepless nights. She noticed patterns, how evidence disappeared in cases with weak defenses, how witnesses changed their stories between preliminary hearings and trial, how black defense attorneys were cited for contempt at rates that defied statistical probability. She documented everything but had no smoking gun, no irrefutable proof that would survive Pierce's connections and reputation. When the Attorney General position opened, her mentor told her she was too young, too inexperienced, that she'd be eaten alive by the political machinery. Alicia applied anyway. During her interview with the selection committee, she laid out a vision for a conviction integrity unit that would review questionable cases and hold prosecutors accountable. She won by a single vote. The call came at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, 3 weeks before Alicia's swearing-in ceremony. She was sitting on her apartment floor surrounded by bankers' boxes filled with transition briefings, eating cold Chinese food and trying to understand the budgetary constraints she'd be inheriting. Her personal cell phone, the number only a handful of people had, lit up with an unknown local area code. "Ms. Bennett? This is Dr. Sarah Chen from the State Forensics Laboratory." The woman's voice carried the cautious precision of someone who'd rehearsed what she was about to say. "We've been reprocessing evidence from older cases using updated DNA technology. One of the samples flagged for retesting was from the Marcus Cole armed robbery case. The results came back today." Alicia's chopstick stopped halfway to her mouth. She set down the container with trembling hands. "The DNA recovered from the baseball cap the perpetrator dropped at the scene excludes Marcus Cole completely. We ran it 3 times to be certain. The profile doesn't match him at any marker. He couldn't have been the person wearing that hat." The room seemed to tilt. Alicia pressed her palm flat against the floor to steady herself. "Are you certain?" "Completely. But there's something else you should know. A woman named Jennifer Vasquez contacted our office last week. She worked as a paralegal in the district attorney's office 5 years ago and she kept copies of files she was ordered to destroy. She has witness statements that were never disclosed to the defense, statements from 2 people who saw someone else running from the scene. Someone who doesn't match Marcus Cole's description at all." Alicia closed her eyes and saw Marcus being led away in handcuffs, saw his mother collapsing, saw Pierce's satisfied smile. When she opened them again, her hands were steady. "Where can I meet Ms. Vasquez?" "She says she'll only talk to you." "And Ms. Bennett?" "She says there are more cases." "A lot more." Alicia met Jennifer Vasquez in a coffee shop 40 miles outside the city, in a corner booth where the surveillance cameras had blind spots. Jennifer was 36, with nervous hands and the exhausted determination of someone who'd been carrying a terrible secret for years. She slid a thumb drive across the table like it was made of nitroglycerin. "I made copies before Pierce ordered me to shred the originals," Jennifer said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Witness statements, lab reports that didn't match the narrative, emails about jury selection strategies. I told myself I'd turn it over someday when I was brave enough. When I read you'd been appointed Attorney General, I knew it was time." The files on that drive led Alicia to Special Agent Marcus Liu at the FBI's Civil Rights Division. Liu had been investigating prosecutorial misconduct patterns across the state for 3 years and had circled Pierce's name multiple times without enough evidence to move forward. Together, they spent the next 6 weeks building a case that could survive any legal challenge. They identified 47 cases where Pierce had prosecuted black defendants and where evidence suppression, witness coaching, or Brady violations appeared in the record. They documented how Pierce systematically undermined black defense attorneys, 12 separate bar complaints filed against them for professional misconduct that were actually instances of them challenging his tactics. Each complaint had been dismissed as a personality conflict by a disciplinary board Pierce had helped establish. The pattern was undeniable. Pierce didn't just win cases. He weaponized the system against anyone who challenged him, and he did it with such confidence that the machinery protected him at every turn. "This is going to detonate," Lou said during one of their late-night sessions, staring at the evidence wall they'd constructed. "Half the legal establishment will defend him. They'll say you're on a vendetta." Alicia thought about Marcus Cole, still sitting in a cell for a crime he didn't commit. "Let them say it. I've got the receipts." The swearing-in ceremony took place in the state capitol rotunda under the dome's soaring architecture, with 200 guests seated in neat rows and news cameras capturing every moment. Alicia wore a navy suit her mother had helped her pick out, and when she placed her hand on the Bible and repeated the oath, to support and defend the Constitution, she thought about every defendant who'd never gotten a fair shot at that Constitution's promises. She spotted Harold Pierce in the third row, his silver hair catching the camera flashes. He'd come because powerful people always came to these events, networking and reinforcing hierarchies. During the reception, he approached her with a champagne flute and the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Congratulations, Ms. Bennett. Quite an achievement for someone so early in their career." His tone suggested he was complimenting a child who'd completed a difficult puzzle. "I'm sure we'll have many opportunities to work together." Of course, the Attorney General's office has historically deferred to experienced prosecutors on complex matters. "Wouldn't want any unfortunate missteps." Alicia accepted his handshake and held it a moment longer than comfortable. "I'm looking forward to working with you, Mr. Pierce. I believe in holding everyone to the same high standards, especially those who've been practicing as long as you have." Something flickered behind his eyes. Uncertainty, maybe. Or the first whisper of alarm. But his smile never wavered. "Of course. Standards are everything in our profession." He moved on to network with a state senator, confident he'd successfully intimidated another young attorney who didn't understand how power really worked. That night, after the last guest had left and the champagne glasses had been cleared, Alicia sat alone in her new office on the 7th floor. The city lights sprawled below her window like scattered stars. She opened her laptop, pulled up the case management system, and typed in the order to formally reopen the Marcus Cole case. Her finger hovered over the submit button for only a second. Then she clicked it and watched the system timestamp the order at 11:53 p.m. The machinery had just shifted directions, and Harold Pierce had no idea what was coming. Harold Pierce learned about the reopened investigation the way powerful men often learn they're no longer untouchable, through a journalist's phone call asking for comment. He was in his office reviewing case files when his assistant buzzed through with unusual urgency. "Mr. Pierce, there's a reporter from the Tribune on line 2. She's asking about the Marcus Cole case and some federal investigation." Pierce felt something cold slide down his spine, but 40 years of courtroom performance training kept his voice steady. "Tell her I don't comment on ongoing legal matters." But the calls kept coming. By the end of the day, 3 more reporters, 2 legal bloggers, and a television producer had requested interviews. Pierce called his attorney, Richard Stamos, a man he'd known since law school and who'd helped him navigate 2 previous bar complaints. "This is Bennett," Pierce said without preamble. "That public defender I embarrassed 5 years ago. She's Attorney General now and she's trying to make a name for herself at my expense. Have you done anything that could expose you?" Stamos asked carefully. "I've prosecuted cases aggressively for 22 years. I've won because I'm better prepared than the opposition. If Bennett wants to reframe excellence as misconduct, that's a political hit job, not a legal issue." But over the following weeks, Pierce watched his carefully constructed world develop cracks. Colleagues who used to meet him for lunch suddenly had scheduling conflicts. The district attorney stopped inviting him to strategy meetings. His calls to judges he'd known for decades went unreturned. The media coverage shifted from, "Is Pierce being unfairly targeted?" to, "How did this go on for so long?" When the formal notice arrived requiring his appearance at an evidentiary hearing, Stamos advised him to retire quietly, to negotiate some dignified exit that would preserve his pension and reputation. "Absolutely not," Pierce said, his voice sharp. "I've never run from a fight in my life. This is a courtroom, Richard. My courtroom. I've controlled that space for 2 decades. Let Bennett bring her little investigation. I'll dismantle it the same way I've dismantled every weak case that's ever challenged me." His arrogance wouldn't let him see what everyone else already knew: the system that had protected him was quietly stepping aside, and the woman he'd once humiliated had spent 5 years learning how to burn it all down. The evidentiary hearing took place in the same courtroom where Pierce had destroyed Alicia Bennett's career 5 years earlier. Every seat in the gallery was filled, with reporters standing along the back wall and sketch artists positioned near the jury box. Pierce sat at the defense table in his signature custom suit, his posture radiating confidence even as his new defense attorney, Stamos, had withdrawn after their last argument, shuffled papers with obvious nervousness. Alicia stood at the prosecution table wearing a teal suit that seemed to glow against the dark wood paneling. She began methodically, presenting the DNA evidence that excluded Marcus Cole, the witness statements that had been suppressed, the timeline Pierce had ignored. The evidence was overwhelming, but Pierce leaned back in his chair with practiced dismissiveness. When Alicia finished, Pierce's attorney rose and delivered exactly the defense they'd anticipated. "This appears to be an unfortunate oversight, Your Honor. Mr. Pierce handled hundreds of cases during this period. While we deeply regret any error, this seems to be an isolated incident rather than a pattern of misconduct." Pierce himself stood to address the court, his voice carrying the same commanding authority that had swayed juries for decades. "Your Honor, I have dedicated my entire career to seeking justice. If mistakes were made in this case, I sincerely apologize. I can only ask for understanding that the demands of a prosecutor's caseload sometimes—" "Mr. Pierce," Alicia interrupted, her voice cutting through his performance like a blade. "Before you finish that thought, I'd like to introduce additional evidence." She nodded to Special Agent Liu, who wheeled in 3 document boxes and a projection screen. The courtroom went silent. What the court is about to see isn't an isolated incident. It's a 20-year pattern. Alicia's voice remained calm, almost conversational, but every eye in the room was locked on her. 47 cases involving black defendants where evidence was suppressed. Emails discussing jury selection strategies specifically designed to exclude black jurors. Witness coaching sessions that altered testimony to match Mr. Pierce's theory of guilt. And a systematic campaign to undermine black defense attorneys through bad faith bar complaints. She began presenting the evidence, case by case. Pierce's own emails appeared on the screen, casual discussions of problem witnesses who needed to be managed, jokes about defense attorneys who were too aggressive for their own good, strategies for steering investigations toward predetermined conclusions. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as 22 years of carefully constructed reputation crumbled in real time. Pierce's face went from red to white to gray. He gripped the edge of the defense table, his knuckles bloodless. "Your Honor," Alicia concluded, "the state moves for immediate suspension of Mr. Pierce's law license, referral of criminal charges for obstruction of justice, and the appointment of a special master to review every case he has ever prosecuted." The judge, a woman who'd been appointed 2 years earlier and had never worked with Pierce, looked down at the defense table. "Mr. Pierce, do you have any response to these allegations?" For the first time in his career, Harold Pierce had nothing to say. The legend had run out of words. Marcus Cole walked out of prison on a Tuesday morning in October, wearing borrowed clothes and carrying a clear plastic bag with his personal belongings. He was 24 years old. He'd gone inside at 19. His mother was waiting at the gate, and when they embraced, Alicia watched from her car across the street and had to wipe her eyes before she could drive away. She met with Marcus privately 3 days later in a conference room at the Attorney General's office. He looked smaller than she remembered, his shoulders curved inward from years of making himself less noticeable. They sat across from each other with coffee neither of them was drinking. "I came to say thank you," Alicia began, but Marcus held up his hand. "You don't need to apologize for what happened 5 years ago. You were fighting a system that was built to beat you." He looked directly at her with eyes that had seen too much. "What I need to thank you for is that you didn't forget about me. That's what breaks people in there, knowing the world moved on and nobody remembers your name. You remembered." Alicia felt something release in her chest that had been locked tight since the day of his conviction. They talked for an hour about his plans, about the compensation claim her office would help him file, about the community college classes he wanted to take. When he left, Alicia sat alone in the conference room and let herself feel the weight of what justice actually cost. The Conviction Integrity Unit officially launched 2 months later. Alicia personally assigned investigators to every case Pierce had touched, creating a systematic review protocol that other states would eventually adopt. Harold Pierce was disbarred, faced federal charges, and disappeared from public life. Some people called it vindication. Alicia called it accountability. She was leaving the courthouse after a routine hearing when a young woman approached her in the hallway. She was maybe 26, wearing an ill-fitting suit and carrying a battered briefcase, and her eyes held the kind of exhaustion Alicia recognized immediately. "Attorney General Bennett? I'm sorry to bother you. I'm a public defender, and the woman's voice cracked. "I was ready to quit. I lost 3 cases in a row, and I started believing I wasn't good enough. But then I heard about what you did with Pierce, and I just wanted you to know that it mattered. You made me believe I could still do this." Alicia saw herself 5 years earlier in this woman's desperate hope. She saw every young attorney who'd been told they didn't belong, who'd been made to feel small by a system designed to protect itself. "What's your name?" Alicia asked. "Carmen Rodriguez." "Carmen, the system is going to try to break you. It's designed to. But every time you show up and fight for someone who can't fight for themselves, you're changing what's possible. Don't let anyone convince you that you don't belong in that courtroom." Alicia handed her a business card with her direct office number. "And when you need someone to remember that with you, call me." She watched Carmen walk away with straighter shoulders, and understood finally that her victory wasn't just about Harold Pierce. It was about every attorney who came after her and saw a path where there hadn't been one before. It was about Marcus Cole sleeping in his own bed instead of a cell. It was about transforming personal pain into systemic change, one case at a time. The fight wasn't over. The system would adapt, would find new ways to protect the powerful and punish the vulnerable. But now there was documentation, precedent, and proof that accountability was possible. And there was a young attorney named Carmen Rodriguez who would remember that justice wasn't about never falling, it was about getting back up and refusing to stop fighting. Alicia walked out of the courthouse into the autumn sunlight, and for the first time in 5 years, the weight she'd been carrying felt a little lighter.